Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
This is an incredibly serious issue. It's one of the most serious issues, I think, facing people and the sovereignty of people going forward. And I don't say that lightly. You will know by now, because we mentioned this, we talked about this back in December, that India moved 86% of its currency, took it out of circulation, just like that. Reported in Forbes magazine back in December, leaving hundreds of millions of people without the means to engage economically, to buy the things they wanted and needed, and so on. Let me read you from that Forbes article, just a brief couple of lines. India's demonetization scheme was a unilateral initiative that was planned in secret by a small group of insiders tied in with the upper echelons of India's government. The strategy was to instantly nullify all 500 and 1,000 rupee banknotes, the most common currency denominations in the country, and then eventually replace them with newly designed, more secure 500 and 2,000 rupee notes. That's what Forbes said at the time. That's not strictly true, that last bit. Now, we've seen similar moves in places like Sweden and even County Cork, of course, from my home place, my homestead, Ireland, has talked about and has initiated schemes to remove cash completely from the city. This is not a joke. Let's welcome our first guest to the programme then. He's got plenty to say about this. He's a financial journalist, an economist, and he wrote a critically acclaimed book called The Abolition of Cash and the Consequences. He's live in Frankfurt right now, and I'm going to tweet his blog, by the way, because his blog is in English. I'm going to tweet that out while we're chatting with him. Let's welcome to the programme Norbert Haring. Norbert, welcome to the programme. Good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm fine, thanks.
And thanks so much for coming on. I'm delighted to be chatting with you. Norbert, just before you and I talk about this issue, I did mention to you earlier on that former spokesman from the Greek finance ministry, Dimitris Yiannopoulos, was on the programme last night, and he said a couple of things that probably won't surprise you. He said Greece is a concentration camp these days, and he said the European Union is basically the Fourth Reich. Now, it did occur to me when he said that German men and women might be sensitive to such terminology and they might find the wording very strong. Do you want to give me a quick comment on what he said? Do you agree with him? What's your take on what's happening to Greece right now?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not majority German opinion on this issue. I do sympathize very much with the Greek. I just saw some statistics from the IMF which show that it's worse than the Great Depression in Greece, and that's just for, you could even call it spite for some principles, because they could have easily been helped, but there were just some principles enforced because we're weak and because we elected the wrong government. So it's really close to a crime what has been done to the Greek. I would say that too, yeah.
Norbert.
And we're also being used as a guinea pig. That also for, this is not their worst problems, but all sorts of anti-cash measures are being imposed whereby the Troika, the government doesn't mind so much because it plays in their hand, but the EU Commission, which is a big anti-cash warrior, and the IMF and the ECB, all against cash, where the Troika there that basically rules against above the government, and they're trying out all sorts of stuff there. They're doing a lot of similar stuff to the Indians.
Now we're going to talk about your excellent article shortly, which you wrote even a month ago or thereabouts, and as promised, I'm going to tweet this out. I want people to follow you. We're all about finding people like you, Norbert, because it's not often that people like you tell the truth. And this is a fact. It's the reason we had Dimitris Yiannopoulos on the programme yesterday. Before we talk about what's happened in India, you mentioned there Greece being used as a guinea pig. Is it punitive? I mean, you said it's punishing. Is it in some way designed, what's happening to Greece, to terrify other countries who might step out of line or who might challenge the hegemony of the Troika, the European Central Bank and the European Union? Is it punitive to warn others?
Most certainly. I mean, if it hadn't been Syriza being elected, but some conservative government, they could have expected a lot more leniency. And you could see it with Portugal, too. They had the screws pretty tightened with their new governments. I think they elected a leftist government. We're sort of lucky that at the time when the screws were tightened on them, the Spanish had an election and they wanted to help the conservatives there win. So, and it was kind of hard to distinguish between Portugal and Spain. It would have been too obvious. So they got away fairly lightly, and we're also not picking as much of a fight as Syriza. So. But you could observe that a lot, that whenever a leftist government was elected or in danger of being elected, that would not have done all these harsh austerity measures so lightly. They tightened the screws pretty severely, and suddenly every deficit target and all that these things were becoming a lot more important suddenly.
By the way, Norbert's blog, his excellent website, can be found at Norbert Haring. That's Haering. If I'm mispronouncing your surname, Norbert, don't hesitate to tell me, by the way.
You're doing pretty good. It's hard.
It is difficult, isn't it? Yeah. It looks like Haring or Haring. Norbert Haring.
Haring is perfect. Yeah.
Haring is perfect. So it's Norbert Haring, HAERING.DE/EN. And we're tweeting that out. You've got to read this, man. Norbert, your article is brilliant. So, certain vested interests in the United States are behind India's push towards the cashless society. Who are these interests? People are telling me George Soros' name is popping up all over the place. Who are these interests and why are they doing it?
Well, on my story, it's more Bill Gates. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of the biggest bankrollers, if not the biggest bankroller, of a whole variety of initiatives that go against cash, although first it was always sold as financial inclusion, which was translated as digitalizing finance, so that it would be more easy to bring it to the people. But then it morphed into really going against cash. There's actually a Better Than Cash alliance that was formed in 2012. Most money presumably is coming from a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's Microsoft basically. So the tech and IT companies in the US, the big ones, are one big group that's behind that. The other ones obviously are the payment services providers. That's also globally dominated by the US companies, and these are in that Better Than Cash alliance. That's Visa and MasterCard. And then there's also big banks. Citigroup is in there, and some foundations like the Ford Foundation, which, in the past, at least, they have often been involved when certain dark money had to be distributed that shouldn't be traced back to certain government sources or whatever. And there is USAID, the development finance company of the U.S. government. And so these are forming the Better Than Cash Alliance, which has the goal of pushing back cash worldwide. And it's also very obvious why we would have an interest in that, because the tech and IT companies were going into payment services, but we're also providing the infrastructure. And these U.S. companies are globally dominating. There's the payment services provider. They want to make money of every liter of milk that you're buying. So if you don't do it in cash, they get their percentage.
Wow.
And there's the American government, which has the interest of these American companies at heart. They make a lot of money, like the current account gets a lot of money from all these exports of payment services. There's a huge surplus in that. And of course, it's also a big source of power for the U.S. government if they can control the international payment system.
Norbert, I said wow there because you just described a massive conflict of interest with the tech companies designing the software for this, but at the same time obviously benefiting from it. When you mentioned Bill and Melinda Gates, is it fair to suggest that somebody like Gates and his wife and the Gates Foundation would be chosen as a vehicle with which to sell this to people because their public image is quite good? Now, I have a lot of problems with Bill Gates and what Bill Gates is doing.
That would make a lot of sense, certainly, to choose them if they let themselves be chosen, yes.
Wouldn't it? How interesting. Now, we what have we learned since this happened in India in December? What do we know? What has it meant for people in that country? I'll just give you a quick tweet before you answer that. Himanshi is living in India and just outside Delhi, in fact. And she's tweeted us to say she's listening in Delhi now. It's in the small hours of Thursday morning there. And she said e-transactions are now used more and more. What do we know about what impact it's had on Indian people there?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, it was known. It wasn't botched or anything. That it would be a terrible hardship for the people was known. Like, there was that's what I was writing about. There was a partnership of U.S. aid involving the Better Than Cash Foundation and the Indian Finance Ministry to push back cash. That's been going on since 2015. There have been other close links even since 2013, so the various U.S. groups were very, very much involved, so I would take issue with that. It was a closed circle around the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. That I think these stories are to deflect attention from these known U.S. links because they were in the open. They just had to be deflected from.
And you mentioned, Norbert, you mentioned U.S. aid there. This is why my listeners are mentioning George Soros, because he's connected, obviously, with U.S. aid. So it's the usual suspects. So this is being...
So you were asking why... I was saying it was known. So during this partnership, there were studies made, and in these studies, you can read that only half of the Indians have a bank account, and even of that other half, a very large proportion wasn't used. Probably a lot of them are phony or something, just for fraud or something. So a very big part of the majority of the Indians don't have a bank account, and more than 90% of transactions have been done in cash. So it was totally clear and known that it would be a disaster for the people, that they couldn't just do it digitally or something, that they would just not have cash, and that's what happened. Like all these people in the shadow economy, it's not like not being able to buy stuff. They couldn't earn their living. They depend from day to day to make enough money to buy food for their children and stuff by doing small services, driving a rickshaw or whatever, and they couldn't find anybody anymore for weeks or even months who had the cash to pay them, and they just didn't have any means to do that digitally. So people were starving and didn't have enough to eat because of that, and that was known, and it was intended to inflict hardship on all these traders so that they would really at the first opportunity, and if they could afford it at all, get something to do digital payment. And I'm pretty sure it was also intended that there would be that international uproar and everything, because now everybody in every country knows that it's dangerous not to be able to do digital payment if your government can do these things to you. So very effective in this in terms of getting digital payments up and running better.
Incredible. So it sounds like what's happened in India is a massive scientific experiment, and they're watching for the reaction, how it's perceived around the rest of the world, how the Indian men and women, how they react to it, how they cope with it. It's just a big experiment, right?
We're talking like that. Like if you, what I've been doing after that happened was just reading up on things that have been happening before, press statements from this partnership and all that. And we were talking about it being an example, what we were trying to do, a scalable model that could be transferred to somewhere else. We weren't letting out what we were planning. We were just talking about experiments in a single city, so we disguised it pretty well, so that it just looked like we were looking for the right city to make these experiments, and nobody knew it would be the whole of India. But we were talking about it being an example for the rest of the world and other countries, and with Better Than Cash Association and other similar groups, which are very well connected and tied up with some UN organization. The World Bank is heavily involved, governments are part, and we're active in all sorts of places like Nigeria, Kenya, and we're very busy, so it's not like we're just doing that in India.
So Nigeria and places like this is what's coming next. We've had a tweet from Mark, who tweets, cashless society. If the banks make bad bets and become insolvent, they can legally confiscate the deposits of their customers to balance their books. Now, we saw this in Cyprus. Is this the big worry, Norbert, that the reason why the IMF, the Troika, the European Central Bank, the World Bank, these Bretton Woods institutions, I think they're tyrants, these are criminals. This is the job. This is what it's all about here. This is about the coming of the bail-in, right?
Yes, we have the bail-in legislation, so it's the law now in Europe that creditors have to be shaved first. And who is that? It's not like big finance who was stupid enough to give some bank a big loan. It's you and me and everybody who has money at the bank. And so it's clear that they have their money taken away, the bank gets in trouble. So if they have that rule, they can't do anything other than taking away cash and making it hard to get your money. Actually, I did an experiment for my book. I went to my bank, and by rights and rules, I can take my money out any day without giving notice or something. And I just wanted 15,000 euros, and they wouldn't give it to me.
They wouldn't give it. They
only
would not.
Because I stayed there and just refused to go away, and they couldn't refuse it legally. After letting me sit there half an hour and calling the police, see if they wanted to check or all that, they gave it to me eventually just because I insisted, but they would have sent anybody else away who would have believed them, but they just didn't have it there.
Norbert, excuse me for interrupting. They called the police, did they, in a bid?
Yeah, that's routine. I mean, all this money laundering stuff is also a way to make you feel like a criminal if you deal with cash. If you have any kind of amounts like more than 5,000 or something that you want to take from the bank, they make you sit there and wait. They call the police so that they can come if they think it's fishy. Now, I was in a suit and everything, and that was fine, and they didn't come. But if I have some Eastern accent and speak bad German and say I want 7,000 euros of my own money, it's not unlikely that the police comes. And I've from my lawyer, I've heard another case where somebody had their accounts canceled just because he's using cash a lot and repeatedly took out cash from a money machine of more than 1,000 euros, and they just canceled his account with no warning or anything. It just said, no, account is canceled. So they make it, they say it's against money laundering, but it also works perfectly that if they have these bail-in rules, and everybody knows about Cyprus, and then there's rumors that a bank is in trouble, and you can get your cash out, everybody would run.
Of course.
And these rules would just cause fires everywhere. But if you can't get your cash out because there isn't any more cash, or they only give you 100 euros, then your money is locked in, and they can very calmly decide whether they take away 10 or 20 or 30% to make the bank whole again.
I want to just remind our listeners, we've got Norbert Herring on the line, norbertherring.de/en. Norbert's book, by the way, is The Abolition of Cash and the Consequences. Outstanding to have him on the programme.
It's
today.
In German, by the way, just so that nobody is disappointed Googling it.
Well, you got to, seriously, Norbert, you got to get that translated into English.
Yeah, I'm thinking about writing the follow-up, which covers that stuff that I was talking about on how this is important for the U.S. and the U.S. control of the financial system and all that. So I'm not sure yet whether I'll write it in English or German.
Get on it. I want to mention, by the way, and again, it's a huge thrill for us, and we're not being subservient to you. We're not procrastinating in front of you, but it's a massive thrill to us when people who've seen the inside of the system have the courage to come out and call things the way they are. You and I both know, and some of our listeners won't know, but you and I know, that tech firms in the United States, DARPA and other firms like that, they've patented eye scanning equipment in order for payments to be made using eye scans. This has been patented. This has been developed. They've also patented cashless payment wristbands. I mean, Norbert, it's not an exaggeration to say this is straight from the pages of George Orwell. This is about tyrannical control, right?
I mean, George Orwell could hardly have dreamed of it, but it's amazing how close he came to what we have now. Actually, MasterCard has recently patented something or put the application in on how to calculate people's weight and size from their purchases. So they're patenting abuse of our data. They would use our purchases that they know about from their cards, estimate our weight and size from our shoes we buy and the clothing, and sell that to the airlines so that they can sell us the right seat or something. I mean, it's absolutely tremendous that they want to have abuse of data patented, that certain way of abusing it. It's really amazing. And of course, I mean, there's so much information. If PayPal and MasterCard know everything we buy, and that includes like a journal we buy. I mean, if you don't dare to subscribe to a journal that's kind of off the beaten track, you buy it at the kiosk for cash. You can't do that anymore. So any journal that's kind of off the government line, you might be on a list, and all this information is consolidated. It's not like MasterCard has some and PayPal has some. There are companies that consolidate all this information. They collect it themselves, or they buy it from all the websites, all the payment providers, put it together in a file, and anybody who has the money can buy it. So it's all there, and it's a huge file with all information about you. And if you can't, even if you're trying to preserve some privacy by doing a lot in cash so that it's not registered, you can't do that anymore. So it's which makes it a lot more valuable, because you know that everything is in there. So the information becomes a lot better, and that is really terrible. And the other thing is, you saw it when with WikiLeaks. All it took was for the U.S. government, no parliament, no court or anything, just the president or somebody calling MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, American Express, and asking them, oh, please don't do business with WikiLeaks. And that was enough that WikiLeaks couldn't get any money anymore, couldn't collect money, and had severe financial problems. You can do that to anybody, and it's done already. Like the U.S. government, if they impose some sanctions on Iran or something for financial deals with them, other countries don't have them, like Germany, and there's a company making totally legal financial deals with them. The Americans just put them on a terror list, which they can do unilaterally, and then no finance company will make any deal with you anymore, and you're basically broke.
You're finished.
You can't even buy an iPhone anymore.
And you know what? And I'm not talking about me personally, even though we have a massive audience, but how long before independent media like us who have guests like you on the program, how long before they make it impossible for our listeners to make financial donations, for us to pay our bills? This is what's coming down the line.
You're just spreading fake news anyway.
You see? That's right. That's right.
That's the fake news business.
That's the fake news business.
But certainly with money they can do it a lot better, yes.
I can't believe we're talking. I'm delighted you're on the program. We've only got about 5 or 6 minutes left. Norbert Herring is on the line, folks. norbertherring.de/EN. This is vital that you understand this information. Isn't it obvious then that what people need to do is to start talking to one another and to understand how finance works, how banks lend money out of thin air, how they create money out of nothing, and more importantly, that countries have to become sovereign again and they have to get out of the criminal European Union. That's the answer, Norbert, isn't it? People have to understand that.
Don't make me say it's a criminal European Union.
Well, you don't have to say anything.
But the first part, I certainly subscribe. I just come from a place where I was giving a talk on how the money system works in front of teachers who are trying to learn about it, which is hard and important because all the textbooks are kind of weirdly wrong on that, where sort of describe what was going on 300 years ago, and it's absolutely essential that people understand, I agree, and it's essential that they use cash so that it's not possible to criminalize everybody with just minor amount. If it's customary to withdraw 900 pounds and pay with it, then it's much less unusual. That's a big thing that you can do against that. There's not so much. I'm also using the legal way. I'm insisting on paying our public broadcasting fee in cash, which they won't let me do, and I'm in court because of that, because by law it's the legal tender, and the government can't refuse to accept the legal tender, and they do it anyway. And I'm doing that to make our members of parliament wake up, because they're never making money laws. They just let the banks do that together with the central banks, and it's clear to whose benefit it will be if they can do it. So I want to make by causing this legal problem that, of course, cash is tedious, and we would have to make some sort of a better sovereign money that you can also use digitally. I want to force them to do that by just insisting on the law.
Norbert,
so that's another thing you can do.
That's another thing. You're welcome back anytime you want to come back. Look, we don't hide here. I believe personally, and I'm not prone to fanciful notions, and I've heard so many speeches made by people like Bill Gates and others, and I've read the UN 2030 documents. The elites, I believe, those with the money and the power, they ultimately want to reduce the population of this planet. And I think this is there are many reasons for the cashless society, but one of them, I believe, is to starve people. I mean, I really do believe that. Now, I know you probably won't accept that, but that's something I believe is part of the overall agenda of this.
I think it's vicious, but I think that would be an ineffective way to get after that goal.
You're right.
So
Listen, you're right. On its own, it would be, but alongside other things that are going on around the world, it plays its part. Listen, I want to thank you for coming on. It's extraordinary.
Thank you for having me.
Norbert, it's great. NorbertHerring.de/EN, and please come back anytime you want. We'd love to have you back, Norbert.
Thank you. I'd like to. Bye-bye.
Look after yourself. In Frankfurt tonight, Norbert Herring, fantastic guest. And of course in Frankfurt, there was so much I could have said about Frankfurt, but I didn't want to do that. Fascinating what's happening. You know, 3 years ago, nearly 3 years ago, in fact, when things were vastly different for me, and I was going to go back into commercial broadcasting. Not that I was inundated with offers, but I had a couple of offers. And David said, look, this is the way to go. Do a program like this. And one of the things he did say, and it pisses you off sometimes if you know, everybody knows somebody like David Icke. I'm not saying they're never wrong, but they're not often wrong. He's wrong from time to time. He's not often wrong. He said, because I said I would only ever do it if we got people from the system talking about these issues. And I don't think we ever will. So it's a waste of time. And at that time he said, no, it isn't. They will talk to a show like yours. People like that will come on. And they won't mind that we talk about satanic paedophilia. And they won't mind that we talk about other things. They will book them, and they will come, was what he said at the time. And it's extraordinary. And maybe it's because another thing that we've talked about over the years, as the agenda, as they speed it up, they can't conceal it anymore. And by not being able to conceal it anymore, it gives courage to people like Dimitris Yiannopoulos. It gives courage to people like Sandra Fecht, wonderful woman. It gives courage to people like Norbert there to say, well, you know what, enough's enough, you know. I'm going to speak out on this. I'm going to talk about it. I can't deny it any longer.